Okay. Now that we're recording, again, welcome. We're recording this for purposes of we're actually going to be putting this on the Zoom Grants library. So then that way you and your staff have access to this later in case anything you want to go back and revisit. Plus also if there's any staff, any financial staff, any program staff that aren't able to attend the meeting that we held earlier this week or this meeting, then they can go back and watch. We're going to be going through a PowerPoint presentation with the information regarding the training, and which that will also be available on Zoom Grants afterwards that you can go into. If some of you haven't been into Zoom Grants for a while, please go in, make sure your passwords still work, make sure the agency information and the contact information is correct. Again, everything that we're going to be talking about will be backed up and supported there in the library, and that's where you will also be uploading documents that we're asking you to include as well. Quick little introductions. Let's go around and we'll introduce the housing and neighborhood development staff that are here on the call. We'll just go and we'll pass the ball to each other. So hey everyone, so Tony Milner, Policy and Program Manager with Housing and Neighborhood Development. And I have the best job in the world because I get to work with fantastic people, such as the ones you're about to meet. Let me throw the ball to Heather.
Good morning, Heather Royal, Community Development Grant Supervisor, also with Housing and Neighborhood Development. And some of you may or may not know me from my previous employer, West Valley City, where I was at for a number of years. So I'm excited to work with you all here at Salt Lake City as well. And Ethan, do you want to go ahead and go next?
Sure. Ethan Sellers, Community Development Grant Administrator, and I work with CDBG and HOPWA.
That leaves
Amanda.
I'm Amanda Best. I'm the Housing Development Program Specialist. So I'm over home and ESG.
Do we have Taylor on the call?
Taylor is not on this one, no. She
Okay.
had some pre-bid stuff. And then just for the sake of knowing who all is on here and keeping a role, so to speak, if everybody in attendance will go ahead and enter your name and the agency that you're with in the chat so that we know you're here and who you're representing, that would be great. That will help us keep a log of that.
Good, and we'll have our staff information included at the end of the slide. So you have our phone numbers, our email addresses as well. Just kind of know too, you saw Ethan and Amanda are over separate grants, and so you can reach out to them directly depending on your grant. And then Heather is over all the grant programs, and then she's the brain of the operation. So anything HUD related, you need to work with Heather on and run those by her. Okay, let's get started. Let's move to the next slide. And thank you everyone for throwing your information into the chat. Speaking of, we'll save room at the end. This is a 1.5 hour training. We'll save room at the end to answer any general questions, any specific questions. This is the time now to ask those questions. We will also, if you have anything that kind of comes up during the training, feel free to throw it into the chat as well, and we'll try to answer it into the chat or directly as we go. We do want this to be a good informative training. For those of you who have worked with federal grants before, worked with Salt Lake City before, welcome back. We're happy to have you as amazing partners. Those of you who are brand new, we're happy to have you as well. Overall, in general, congratulations everyone for getting to this point. We do have a very lengthy competitive application process. It's very difficult. We ask a lot of you. We come back to you with additional questions. You guys are always good to follow up with us. The applications go before our resident advisory board, then the mayor, then the council. It's quite a process. So just first of all, congratulations to all of you to getting to this point. And again, we all look forward to the programs that you'll be operating, serving the low income, vulnerable and underserved communities of Salt Lake City. So thank you. Again, you can see there with the agenda, we'll stick to the 1.5 hours. Staff here on the call will be taking turns kind of going over specifics. Amanda, will you go to the next slide, please? Okay, just in general, again, Salt Lake City is an entitlement HUD-funded, I guess, a HUD entitlement city. We're pretty much been around from the very beginning with CDBG grants, and we keep going. They haven't taken our money yet, knock on wood. So thank you guys so much. We do run the 4 programs: CDBG, ESG, Home, and HOPWA. A couple of things to kind of keep in mind. Just this is just kind of the please understand that we're the grantee of these HUD funds. You guys are the sub-grantees, sub-recipients, or the project sponsors for these funds. So then basically anything that required of HUD is then put upon you guys as well. You guys are receiving responsibility for HUD regulations and compliance. And we are here to help you through that process and explain that process to make it easy for your staff and not an administrative burden. Couple of things just to kind of keep in mind. That's just always it's kind of just good things to know about. Sometimes it's kind of common mistakes. We'll go over into more detail. Every year the income eligibility or guidelines are updated. They've been updated for this year. We want to make sure that you have the correct calculator for the coming year. We'll go over the VAWA addendum, how there's a lot of confusion sometimes that federal act actually expired, but then HUD still considers it in place, and we can talk about that in a little bit. As well as Salt Lake City boundaries. The boundaries do not follow zip codes. There's a couple of zip codes that kind of overlap with Mill Creek and South Salt Lake, and so we want to make sure that if you're doing any type of assistance that is place-based, such as rent assistance, that you have the latest and greatest map, so that makes it easy for your team to then go and find addresses for Salt Lake City. Thankfully, I'll say thankfully the pandemic kind of jumped us into technology. We don't do hard copies anymore of signatures with the grant agreements back and forth anymore, or notarized signatures. Everything is now through Adobe Sign. Many of you have actually experienced this process in the past year, and we'll be continuing this moving forward. Salt Lake City's council is still meeting virtually, and they're making small plans to kind of phase back in-person meetings. As well as usually this training, we usually have in person as well because of COVID restrictions and just kind of out of abundance of caution, we're still doing meetings remotely. So keep in mind, plus staff is working kind of hybrid. You can kind of see that Amanda's in her beautiful home. Hey, Amanda. And Heather, Ethan, and myself are here in the office. But please know that you can always kind of reach out to us by phone and email and get one of us at least. We'll go over to about the attestation for CFR 200 on the reimbursement cover sheets and kind of talk about the importance of that and those signatures. Plus, we want to hear from you guys too. We know that COVID has kind of greatly turned everything upside down for your agencies, for your services. We kind of want to save time at the end to talk about any existing kind of COVID precautions or any kind of new changes to your agencies, your organizations due to COVID and kind of the phase that we're going into now of COVID recovery. Okay, next slide. Here's a little snapshot of just where we are in our application process. It is always overlapping because of the federal fiscal years that we operate under. Today, we're doing the training. Grant agreements will be going out in June and July. Watch for those. And again, that's why it's really important that we make sure that we have your correct contact information in Zoom grants for who to be contacting and sending the information to. I want to make a huge plea for everyone to, when you get your grant agreement, you'll be working with Ethan and Amanda to set those up for the scopes of works and the budgets. But then also please, because sometimes those are addressed to the executive director. If you and your agencies can always kind of pause, this is the best time to really review the scopes of services and the budgets with the folks who are kind of implementing these programs, especially the financial staff and then the program staff as well. Take a moment, look through the outcomes, look through the budget breakdown, make sure everything is in place as where it should be. It's always a process to, once it's actually signed and gets routed through the city, then to go back and then amend any type of agreement. So sometimes program staff don't actually see it until it's actually signed, and then that's when whoops or concerns. So please pause, make sure everyone has a chance to review it before your executive director or authorized signature signs off on that. Just kind of a plug to and a reminder about our next round of applications for the coming year, for the coming year, 22-23, which will be open in the fall, sometime in October, and you'll be watching for that as well. Okay, next slide. A little snapshot too of just when the time period, again, these are fiscal years, so this will be starting July 1st, ending June 30th of 2022. Again, you are taking on obligation, the responsibility of the federal regs. We'll make sure everything in your agreement will have the citation for the CFRs. And so make sure that you and again, we are here to kind of help you through that process to make sure that you're in alignment. The whole purpose of this training is to make sure that we are here to help you guys, to kind of walk you guys through the process, the eligible activities that are in compliance with HUD's current information, as well as any additional information that comes through. We want to make sure that we start things off on the right foot and then stay on the right foot. Again, pay close attention to the scope of work and the budget before you sign. Okay, with that, I will shut up for a little bit and pass the ball over to Heather, which will go over into our consolidated plan.
Yeah, thank you. The Salt Lake City's consolidated plan, the current 5-year consolidated plan, is 2020 to 2024. Many of you probably already looked through that prior to filling out the application so that you knew where your projects or activities would align with the current consolidated plan. But the purpose of this plan is to be the roadmap for how the city will prioritize and allocate funding for that 5-year period. So we're just going to briefly go over the 5 goals of the con plan, and one of those is where your program or activity will fall. Will you go to the next slide, please, Amanda? So our first one is housing, which is just to provide expanded housing options for all economic and demographic segments of Salt Lake City's population while diversifying the housing stock within neighborhoods. Next slide. Transportation, which aims to promote accessibility and affordability of multimodal transportation options. The building community resiliency, which aims to build resiliency by providing tools to increase economic and/or housing stability. Next slide, please. Thank you. Homeless services, which will expand access to supportive programs that help ensure that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And then finally, behavioral health, which will provide support to low-income and vulnerable populations experiencing behavioral health concerns such as substance abuse disorders and mental health challenges. If you want to read the plan in its entirety, there's a hyperlink that will be included in this that you should be able to click on, and then that's also available on the HAND website. You can go and check that out in its entirety as well. You're also welcome to reach out to any of us anytime, and we can provide additional details on that also. Real quick before we move on, Tony, do we want to circle back just a little bit and brief this group like we did the first one on the changes that are coming to hand?
Yes, thank you so much. So as of last night, our city council actually passed the budget for the coming year. Included in that budget was a recommendation from our director of our department leader, which is community and neighborhoods, and is a division of that department for housing and neighborhood development. So community neighborhoods director Blake Thomas and the mayor actually put forward some changes in the budget, which also include rebranding housing and neighborhood development. We've been housing and neighborhood development since we were launched many, many moons ago. But then the current proposal right now is to rebrand housing and neighborhood development to, drumroll, to housing stability. The reason for this too, other departments that are kind of similar, deal with similar activities, programs, and funding sources, those in Boston and Denver have done something similar. They really want to kind of focus on the stability of housing, the importance of housing, that all kind of roads lead back to housing stability. So the main thing to know is that this is moving forward. You'll get more information about this rebrand. And then also too, the most important thing is that staff are remaining the same and programs are remaining the same. So it shouldn't affect anything on your end for your programs. It'll just be a rebranding here in the city from housing and neighborhood development to housing stability. So watch for more information about that soon. Thanks, Heather.
Cool. So these grants, HOPWA and CDBG, are the ones that if you're working with these grants, feel free to reach out to me with any questions or concerns that you might have. So HOPWA is Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. So that one, the requirement is that the client has an HIV or AIDS diagnosis. And the cool thing about this one is this has the most broad service area. So it's the Salt Lake Metropolitan Statistical Area. So that's Salt Lake County, Tooele County, and Summit County. So if you're working with HOPWA funds and you choose to work with any of, want to work with clients in Tooele or Summit counties, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about what expanding services to those areas would look like. But just know that you are available to do that. And then beneficiaries of this program must be at 80% AMI or below. And then the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, we have two different components of this. We have housing and neighborhood improvements, and then we have public services. So public services is the component of CDBG that's our most competitive, but also a pretty small amount compared to our CDBG award, because unfortunately it's capped at 15% of what our CDBG award is from HUD, but it is also the most competitive. We have the most applications. So if you receive that funding, congratulations. And then the housing and neighborhood improvement section is focused on housing, rehab, other neighborhood improvements, things like that. So everyone in this program as well must be at 80% AMI or below. And then just know that this one is tied exclusively to Salt Lake City boundaries. So it's not countywide. So everyone you're working with has to be tied to a Salt Lake City resident with this funding. Then next slide.
Okay, I apologize. Right when it's my turn to talk, my dog started barking. So the perks of being at home. So I am over the ESG and home programs. So if you have any questions on those, feel free to reach out to me. ESG is typically a smaller pot of money, and it's specifically for shelters and operating costs of homeless shelters, as well as providing essential services to people experiencing homelessness. So this one has a lower AMI than any other program. It's 30% AMI, or they have to have proof of homelessness, depending on what your program is. And these participants can be within the whole Salt Lake County. So it doesn't have to be just Salt Lake City boundaries, it's the entire county. And then for home, this is to provide affordable housing that is more of a permanent housing situation. So this is typically rental assistance, and we also have down payment assistance. So if you are doing rental assistance, all of the participants have to be at or below 60% AMI, and down payment assistance can go up to 80% AMI. And the home income limits, like Tony touched upon earlier, those are updated and they went into effect June 1st of 2021. So those are all in the Zoom Grants library if you need those, and they're also on the HUD Exchange website. If you need those, you can also reach out to us too, and we can send those to you directly. And the home funding is only for Salt Lake City boundaries, only for housing within Salt Lake City. And then when it comes to program documents that need to be within your application, so, or not your application, you're already approved. But these are different documents we need before we can complete your contract. So Ethan and I went in, and all of these are available in Zoom Grants for you to upload right now. Some of them are going to be specific to your agency, and then others do have templates that you can use. So the ADA questionnaire, the disability and non-discrimination employment form, we have templates that you can utilize if you don't have your own version of that. And so if you have any questions on these or need help figuring out exactly what that looks like, let us know. But all of those are in Zoom Grants right now. There's the option for you to upload them. So if you want to go in and upload those as soon as possible, that would be greatly appreciated.
All right, and then for reporting, keep in mind that we require quarterly reports 15 days after each quarter ends. So the first quarter ends October 15th, second quarter is January 15th, third is April 15th, and then the annual report or fourth quarter is July 15th. And so this is one of the most common errors that we get. It's not a huge deal. You'll just get an email from Amanda or I requesting that you adjust this. So please keep all your reports cumulative with the clients that you've served. So that means if you serve 50 clients in quarter one and then quarter two, 50 clients, that means your quarter two report will be 100 clients. So you're not doing it per quarter. Everything is cumulative for the fiscal year. And then answer all prompted questions. Just put an NA if it doesn't apply to you, because the way we have to set up Zoom grants, we might have some ESG specific questions or CDBG specific questions. So if you don't know or like that doesn't apply to us, just put the NA. Yeah, housing programs must submit addresses as an attachment. And then one of the things we're going to start really requesting more, we've always asked for this in the past as kind of like an optional thing, but any impact stories, success stories, anything like that, city council, the mayor, the resident advisory boards really like seeing those. So that could be, you know, you had a fundraising event that went really well, and it could be you have a YouTube video of that. It could be you created a pamphlet for that. Photos of clients, obviously that have a signed release, but you can submit those with the quarterly reports, and we'd very much appreciate that if just as you're working on those throughout the year. The next slide.
Okay, and here's some insight onto how we calculate the clients served with the specific funding awarded from Salt Lake City. So we look at the total program budget, and then we look at the percent of our funding that goes into the program budget. So for this example, it shows 3% of the total program budget is the Salt Lake City funding. And so we would expect that about 3% of the clients served would be reported to Salt Lake City and would be Salt Lake City clients. So this is typically how we look at it. And so we'll compare our numbers to the number that you give us for your outcomes, just to make sure that they're similar. And then when you're calculating the clients served, these are just some different things to take into consideration. So demographics need to be reported to us in our quarterly reports. So those need to be tracked somehow. And then also for Salt Lake City residents, we want to make sure that the people that you're reporting to us are specific Salt Lake City residents, unless you are able to serve outside of Salt Lake City, like ESG and HOPWA. So those are certain things that we want to make sure you're tracking correctly. And then obviously we want to make sure that you're sending us eligible clients. If you have a program where some are specific to a certain program and then there's some flexibility with other dollars you have, just make sure that you are reporting those clients who are actually eligible for the federal funding that we have awarded you.
So please keep in mind that we enforce and require you to submit civil rights documentation for fair housing documentation. So what's in Zoom grants, we require you to submit and sign off that you'll protect and ensure equal access for any protected classes. So that includes national origin, color, sex, disability, sexual orientation, familial status, religion, race, source of income, and gender identity. And then furthermore, there's HUD's affirmatively furthering fair housing. So that goes beyond some of the broader anti-discrimination rules to include promotion of racial and ethnic concentrated areas of poverty, access to opportunities such as transit, employment, education, and recreational opportunities. And so just know we do take these forms seriously, and we will ask about these in any monitoring or technical assistance that we do with your agencies later in the year. And then we will request that clients have access to request a grievance with the agency if they feel they've been discriminated against in any way. So that could be where they talk to a manager, a director, a board member, as long as you have some sort of grievance policy for clients. If they feel they've been discriminated against in any way, that's what we'll be looking at. So if you don't have that now, please make steps to adjust that in the coming months. And then next slide. Oh, sorry, one more thing I forgot. We at Tony will be doing a really awesome sounding training with the Disability Law Center on Tuesday, June 29th from 1 to 2. I'm going to throw that link in the chat. So it will be covering LGBTQIA+ groups and how fair housing and discrimination intersects with those groups, and then what types of protections are available for them. So you're more than welcome to attend that if you want to learn more. And then also, if you're interested in joining a monthly fair housing meeting that we have with someone from the Salt Lake City Housing and Urban Development Office, feel free to reach out to me. That's optional, but if your agency wants to learn about kind of what's going on in our community and anything like that, reach out to me. Now, next slide.
So these are some examples of forms that will need to be in all of the client files that each organization is required to keep these and keep them safe. So these are just some overarching examples. Each program has a little bit more specific of things that are needed, but the basic thing for everything is the intake forms and documentation of income. And then when it comes to certain programs like ESG, we need homelessness status. And for HOPWA, we need documentation of HIV and AIDS status. And if you're doing any sort of rental assistance, then we'll need a copy of the lease agreements and make sure that the required addendums are in there, and habitability inspections, and then the lead-based paint inspection as well. And if you are doing any rental assistance within Salt Lake City, we do require that you make sure the landlord has a current business license within Salt Lake City as well. And then when it comes to overall program, we want to make sure that you have policies and procedures that are program specific, an organizational chart, and chart of accounts and timesheets that just show where the funding is going so that that's easily tracked and we can easily see that everything is going to eligible costs. This is not an exhaustive list. If you have questions on what may or may not be required, definitely let us know. This is kind of the base for all files. And we also go off of the HUD monitoring handbook to make sure that we are checking all of the required documents when we do monitoring or when we talk to you about what's required in the files.
So environmental reviews, there's 2 steps to this. So every agency, we need to do an environmental review before we're able to do any reimbursements for you. So this is why we will need your document submitted on Zoom Grants, because we need to input that information into HUD system. So like what your budget will be, total clients that you expect to support with this amount of funding that you received, things like that. So we're not able to do that until you have all your Zoom Grants documentation uploaded. So please keep that in mind. We'd like to work on that as soon as possible, like in July, later this month if possible. So please, as soon as you're able to, start submitting those documents, and then the sooner Amanda and I can get these initial environmental reviews done. And then additionally, if you're a CDBG or home agency and you receive housing funding, we need to do site-specific reviews anytime you wish to expend funding on a client. So that could be, you know, you're doing a renovation, you're doing a mortgage assistance program, anything like that. Send Amanda or I the site-specific environmental review form. If you don't know what that is, feel free to reach out to us, but just know that you can't be reimbursed for that funding if an environmental review form was not submitted prior to that. And so, yeah, Amanda and I will fill those out usually in 1 to 2 business days and get them back to you. And then as soon as we receive that, you're okay to move ahead with that project. Next slide.
So this goes back into kind of what Ethan was talking about with reporting. We want to make sure that all the reports you submit are using year-to-date data. Again, if we do see a discrepancy, we'll just send you an email and ask to correct that, or if that's correct. And then all of the reports are going to be completed in Zoom grants, and they're all due on the 15th after the end of the applicable period. And then for HIMIS input, that's required for any CDBG agencies providing homeless services, ESG, and HOPWA. And then DV providers have to have a comparable database. And you can go through the HIMIS team to make sure that you're all set up, and all of the programs should be ready to go at this point for you to use that in the next year. And then for timeliness, we just want to make sure that if you have any delays, whether that's reporting or spending down, that you're letting us know as soon as possible. We do have a risk analysis that we use and that we communicate to our boards and to the mayor and council, that and timeliness is part of that. So if there is some delay in reporting or spending down, then that is communicated, and it could impact your future grant funding. So the important thing is just to communicate to us so that we know what's going on, what issues might be happening or obstacles, so that we can kind of figure out how to move forward from there, and help you to spend down all your money if that isn't happening, and to try to figure out how we can help you in any way.
Okay, technical assistance and monitoring. We provide technical assistance year-round. Their new agencies will be receiving technical assistance within the first 90 days of the program year. And then monitoring visits happen every year. We use a risk analysis spreadsheet to determine who's going to get monitored each year. So as Amanda already mentioned, timeliness and financial management is one of the things that we look at in that risk analysis. That being said, because 2020 in all its glory threw us all some curveballs, that's not something that weighed really heavily this last year, and it's not something we're holding folks to for the last program year, the year we're currently in. Moving forward, that's something that, again, is going to be taken into account pretty heavily. New programs or new agencies will be monitored the first year of those programs, just to ensure that you are set up the way that you need to be set up, that you know what's expected, that you're following that. Sometimes it's easier to catch issues on the front end than later on. And then from there, it really depends on what comes down in the risk analysis, including those factors that we use. We have a scoring rubric, and then the length of time it's been since you were monitored last. When you're monitored, if there are any concerns or findings during that monitoring, just know that it's likely to be a 2-year process with us, if not 3, just so that we can follow up that next year or 2 and ensure that any issues that arose that were corrected remain corrected, and that you're continuing to move down a better path. It's not that we're picking on you, it's just that we want to follow up and ensure that whatever was implemented during that first monitoring visit remains in place as staff changes and what have you. We use the same monitoring checklist that HUD uses. And if you want to view those or print those ahead of time so that you can see what it is we're looking for specifically and make sure you're in compliance with all of those, you can, this blue hyperlink at the bottom of this page, you can access that. You can go to the HUD Exchange and find that. And then you can also reach out to any of us and we can provide that to you as well. Next page. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah. And so VAWA requirements, like Tony said, are technically expired, but they are still in effect for HUD. I believe the current administration is working on implementing them and actually making them no longer expired. But when it comes to HUD, the VAWA addendum is still required. Some of you may have had VAWA addendums that had an expiration date. So if you do have that one, just make sure you're checking that and that there is no expiration date on the addendum that you're using. And if there is, or you would like a different one, we have one that you can use with all of the required VAWA language. And so essentially all of the federal funding needs to utilize this act. If you're doing any sort of rental assistance or doing any sort of housing assistance, to make sure that any victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, that they're all being protected. And we also require that if you have any sort of housing or shelter that's being provided, that there's an emergency transfer plan and that it follows all of the correct VAWA standards. So we have these also in the Zoom Grants library that you can look at and utilize. If you are not sure what we're talking about, or if you have any questions, please let us know. We want to make sure that you have all of these and that all of them are correct and up to date. Yeah.
So the reimbursement process, whenever you submit a reimbursement request, and please know you're able to do this after you receive your recorded contract back from us. So we'll send those out after we begin routing those. So anytime after that period, you're able to request a reimbursement request for your funding. So everything is on a reimbursement basis. So like you've already had to have spent the money before. We won't pay you prior to you expending the funding. And then you will work and submit everything on Zoom Grants. So if you have any questions about how to operate Zoom Grants, please reach out to Amanda or I. And then on the invoice, you'll create a title for it. You need to submit supporting documentation. So what that is will depend on your agency and the type of services that you're doing. So if you're a housing entity, it's information about the households being served, their AMI levels, information about the address/house. If you're a client services agency, we'll need, like the client supplies, like an itemized receipt. If it's salaries, it will be like signed time cards, things like that. So we will always need supporting documentation. And additionally, you'll need an invoice that matches everything on the invoice that you're submitting. So if you don't have that, you might get a question from Amanda or I. If there's something with a weird title, we might need to ask what that is. So if you're submitting a receipt that has other costs on it, please circle or highlight what you're charging to, CDBG, ESG, HOPWA, whatever. And then, if you have any questions about the 10% de minimis, we do have that form on Zoom Grants as well. If you have a negotiated indirect cost rate, you'll need to submit that form to us. We are not able to issue those. Those are explicitly through a federal government agency, but otherwise you'll likely just default to the direct de minimis rate. So let us know if you have any questions about those. The next slide.
Okay. The procurement clause, this goes over to CFR 200.320, and it to CFR 200, as many of you know, is where the federal government outlines admin cost principles, audit requirements, and procurement for all federal awards. This goes over to 200.320, goes over the process you need to go through to secure goods and services if you're using federal funding to do that. If you're not using federal funding, I'm sure you have your own internal procurement policies and procedures. The first is micro purchases. This generally covers anything up to $3,000. The second is small purchases, which covers anything up to $150,000 with a few exceptions. And the third is sealed bid process, things over $150,000 and all construction related projects. there's the number 4 is the competitive proposals, which is things over $150,000, typically where there's a fixed price or cost for that. And then you'll have to do an RFP process. And then the 5th is sole source, where it's unique or it's a public emergency, and then it has to be authorized as well in order for there to be no competition. If you want greater detail on that, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can provide a breakdown of those regulations, or you can reference 2 CFR 200 and the federal regulations. And then section 320 will go over this specific portion of it. But this is what you'll need to be following in order to procure any goods and services with the federal funding. Next slide, Amanda.
With common missteps, again, these are things that Amanda or I will just follow up with an email generally, but just so we can try to catch some of these before. So the most common is reports not being submitted by the due date. If you feel that there will be any concerns, like if you have a big event going on at your agency right before reports due, and you know your support staff are needed for that event, just try to reach out to us as soon as possible and say, hey, we might get it in the following week. Let us know if you have any concerns with that. But we do need to submit that information to HUD, so that's why those reports are important. And then on the reports themselves, the demographics and income section, when those numbers do not match. So that's really asking the same question, how many people did you serve that quarter? But then just different ways of breaking them down, either by their demographic or their income. So if you served 100 people, demographic should be 100 and income should be 100. Those should never be separate. And then reporting all clients served in the program. And so we always want to report accurate information. So, ensuring that everyone that was served by the funding is appropriate. It's not someone that was just, given a slight referral to something else. It's something where you're doing the services listed in the contract and reporting those as a client served. Ineligible expenses being submitted for the reimbursement. Like a pizza party or something, just don't submit that. We won't approve it. Documentation lacking appropriate source documentation. So lacking appropriate source documentation. So like timesheets, proof of payment. So that will result in a delay in the reimbursement. So just please submit those with everything. And then agencies not spending all their awarded funds in the program year. If by the end of the fiscal year you feel that you won't be able to expend your fundings, please try to reach out to us as soon as possible and let us know the reasoning. We might potentially be able to work something out depending on the reason. So like COVID was a good example. Like we might be able to say it's completely fine that you're not spending the last 20% of your funding. We always prefer that you expend all that you can, but just let us know if there's a reason why you're not able to. And then incorrect income determination. So that would be, serving someone that's 100% AMI. We generally won't approve that. We won't approve, I shouldn't say generally. And then policies and procedures are missing or lacking. So that's what I was talking about with civil rights, fair housing documentation. If we're monitoring you, doing a technical assistance with you, we want to ensure that all those documents are signed, that there's appropriate client grievances, that there's whistleblower policies, things like that. Then next slide.
Okay, and here are some resources that you can use that can help you along with your funding as well. So the SPDAT training and HIMIS training, those are all done with Utah HIMIS, and they can provide you with annual training and help you if you have any questions with those sorts of things. And then there's also the Utah Case Manager training and certification, and fair housing links and resources are there as well as the meeting that Ethan mentioned for fair housing. If you're interested in grant writing, there are different seminars with Utah nonprofits, and HUD does a grant writing seminar. We're just not sure who will be the one taking over and doing that at this moment. So if you have any questions about that or are interested, we'll send you that email as soon as we know who's taking that over. And then the 2022-2023 grant applications will be coming up, which is, it seems so far away, but it's so close. And so that's going to be coming in the late summer, early fall. And if you have any questions with that or want to make sure that you're on the list to get those that notification, let us know. But basically all of our organizations that have had past funding will be getting notified of those. And then if you have any questions and you really, really want to get some technical assistance or really, really want us to monitor you, you can always let us know and we are more than happy to do that. But yeah, technical assistance and monitoring, those are just ways that we can help you and guide you to make sure that those funds are being used correctly. So hopefully we're not too scary, but if you need any help, please let us know. And then of course, HUD Exchange is a great resource. That's the resource that we use all the time, and you are more than happy to use that on your own if you have any specific questions too.
Then with next steps, so if you're receiving current fiscal year funding, please expend that by June 30th, and then you're able to submit reimbursements by July 30th. After that point, we won't be able to approve anything for reimbursement wise, and then get your final report in by July 15th. And then one of the important things is to start working on the upcoming contract required documents. So let us know if you have any questions with that. Look for your contract. It hypothetically might bounce to some person in the agency that might no longer be there, but generally we will submit it to who's listed in Zoom Grant. So that's typically the executive director and some of the grant staff. So please be aware if that needs to be updated, and you're able to always go in and update or add additional contacts in Zoom Grants. And then with the environmental reviews, like I was mentioning earlier, please respond quickly if we have any questions or need additional supporting documentation. And then this fall, we will have the 2022-2023 fiscal year applications going through the resident advisory board. So that will likely be in October. And then everything will still need to be under the consolidated plan for 2020-24. If you have any questions about that, again, let us know. And then at some point in the near future, we will send out just a very quick survey that you can let us know how this training was and if there's anything we can improve on.
Okay, that pretty much wraps this up. This is a list of all the current housing and neighborhood development staff that you could reach out to if you needed to. Housing and neighborhood development, soon to be housing stability. Of course, you guys know that Ethan handles CDBG and HOPWA, Amanda handles ESG and Home. So if those are the programs you're being funded under, they would be your first point of contact. And then for anything additional, or if they're out, you can always reach out to Tony and I as well. I think let's open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions? I haven't seen anything come through the chat.
Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, or again, you can throw something into the chat. And while you guys think about some really good questions, I do want to throw out there too, just how much the kind of, relay on behalf of the city, how much the mayor and the council greatly appreciate all the work that you do. It's always a very tough recommendation process that the mayor and the council go through. They recognize all the amazing basic needs and vital and critical services that your organizations are offering. So I just want to extend that the mayor and the council greatly appreciate all that you do. And again, we, on behalf of hand staff, we greatly appreciate you guys as well.
Hey, Tony, this is Jason with Assist. I just had one quick question. I think Amanda was talking about the formula that you guys use in terms of determining the ratios of total program funds versus federal grant funds that are received through Salt Lake City. I'm assuming for a program like ours where we're helping specific clients, and that the number of clients that we help is going to vary depending on the amount of financial assistance we're providing them. You're looking more for ratio of kind of hard cost dollars spent as it compares to our total program rather than exact number of clients. Is that correct?
Yeah, you've kind of captured it. It's kind of one of these things too. We need everyone on the call to really kind of understand and recognize that even when everyone applied for these funds back in October of last year, there was your application request base it, and then it kind of goes through what you were actually funded for by the board, by the mayor, by the council, and then what was finally approved. So then there's always that requested amount versus what the funding amount is, and there's all the different adjustments in between. So then that difference, but then because of that any changes to that, then that affects the outcomes. So that's something to keep in mind. But then again, too, we're always looking for breaking apart not the total operational expenses for the organization, just the program expense, but then also out of that program expense, Salt Lake City residents and how much our funds are covering. So it's something that some of you won't be affected at all based on what you were applied for and what you set in your application for. Some of you will kind of go through that that calculation, and Ethan and Amanda will work with you directly to kind of understand where you fall on that calculation and make sure that your organization feels good about the outcomes that we are basically saying that our funds are going to be covering.
Did that answer your question, Jason?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Thank you.
And then Terry had the question with reporting, will we be providing invoices or receipts? So on Zoom Grants, you'll be uploading the receipts that you expended, or that could be any cost that your agency has expended. So that if you're doing staff support like salaries, that could be just uploading the timesheets. If it's client costs, uploading the receipts, or if it's, a housing service, uploading, contractor reports, information about the household. So generally you will be uploading everything with the invoice, and then we'll let you know if we need any additional supporting documentation. And then after that point, then we'll approve everything on Zoom Grants and then get that to our finance department. And then after they approve it, they'll issue the check. Does that answer your question, Terry?
So let me just kind of back that up a little bit. So your invoices and receipts will not be provided with the reports. They will be provided with your reimbursement requests. When you do your quarterly reporting, that's not where you'll put those. Those are provided to us beforehand in between when you do your reimbursement request, but not with the reports themselves.
Sorry, did I say reports instead of request?
No, her question was specific to reporting.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions that anybody has? You want to unmute for, put in the chat, raise your hand. Nothing. Wow. Okay. Actually, we got a few more questions this time than last time, so that's good. Okay, if everybody feels good, I think we can wrap this training. Again, if you think of anything afterward that you forgot to ask or didn't want to ask in this setting, you're welcome to reach out to any of us anytime, and we'd be happy to walk you through those issues or questions or provide any technical assistance that's needed. And then this recording will also go on Zoom Grants into the library. Yes, this meeting was recorded, so it will go onto Zoom Grants into the library where you can refer back to it anytime and then continue to ask questions through us if you have those. And if everybody feels good about that, I think we can end this a little bit early. which would be nice. Everybody good? Okay, sounds great. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank
Have a
Thanks,
good
everyone.
day.